All right, let's bring in a guest for today. He's the head of advocacy and strategy at the Employers and Manufacturers Association. It's Alan McDonald. Alan joins us. Good morning, sir.
Morning. How are you guys?
Doing
Morning,
very
Alan.
well. Thank you for giving us a few minutes to have a chat. I guess primarily about the the effect of the mandates and stuff on the business side of things.
Yep.
How does a business? I mean, obviously we know some businesses are struggling. I mean, I run a business that's had impacted by mandates and by COVID in general. But how do we balance what the health professionals are saying, which seems to be unanimously now is not the time to take mandates off, versus what I'm assuming most businesses are saying, which is, we want all of our customers back, not just 96% of them which are vaccinated.
Yeah, and the issue that you've got there, Pat and Chewy, is that 96% of customers aren't back yet because there's very much a self-imposed lockdown. If you walk through just about any main street anywhere, it's tumbleweeds running down through them. And I happen to have been traveling around it a little bit lately, and Wellington, Tauranga, Hamilton, Auckland. It's not that long ago, I was down south, and Queenstown was like a ghost town. So it's a self-imposed lockdown. And so I think the main thing that needs to change is the language around it, because there's still quite a lot of fear in the community. And at some point, we are very, very soon, I think, too, we have to get used to the idea of actually living with this and trying to be as normal as possible while taking all the precautions. And I've been listening to you talk in the last couple of minutes. The mandates worked really well for business, particularly when we had the Delta variant, because it was, quite more harmful, I think, than the current one. And so it gave businesses a lot of certainty in managing things in their workplace, and particularly from a health and safety point of view. But I think with Omicron sort of having overrun and bypassed everything, people in the business community aren't spreading, to a limited degree, aren't spreading Omicron. It seems to be coming more out of the schools and the communities. And, I know in our own workplace, we've got multiple people off because they've got kids at school or had kids at school that have now got Omicron. So in many ways, from the business point of view, mandates are kind of past the purpose of what they were originally brought in for. But that's not to say they haven't served a very useful purpose in managing particularly the Delta variant, but also slowing the spread of Omicron initially while we caught up on vaccines and got the rat tests in place.
You talked about a self-imposed lockdown. So that also therefore means that mandates restricted, and look, I agree with you. I mean, I'm not going to restaurants or cafes and stuff at the moment by choice because of Omicron being out there. But that therefore means the mandates are irrelevant, because if it's self-imposed, that's not going to change the day. It's like, oh, mandates are off. That because all people like me will be thinking is now that cafe is going to be full of unvaccinated people, which increases the risk of passing on COVID. So that's taking those off, the mandates off, is not going to therefore help if if we are self-imposing our restriction on going into businesses, is it?
No, and that's why I suggested that the language around this has to change, whether it's from government departments, our leaders, or just in the general community. Because, in Auckland anyway, where I'm based, it looks like we're through the worst of it. And I think too, if your point about surges and things elsewhere around when they've taken off some of the restrictions, we're much more highly vaccinated than many of those comparable countries.
Yeah.
I think there's only one or two that might be more vaccinated than we are. So, as I said earlier, at some point we've got to try and come to the realization that we're going to have to live with this. And one of the more encouraging things I've heard lately in discussions with ministers and others is that in the future they will leave the management of future waves or future outbreaks to the business community. So it's something we've been asking for the last 18 months or so, is just give us what the restrictions are and let us manage them, rather than have things like, MB picking winners and losers on who can and can't open and those sort of things. Our view has always been, if you meet the restrictions, you should be able to open. And that hasn't always been the case. And that would lower the economic impact. But as I also said, there's still quite a lot of worry and concern in the community. So, you have to take them with you, and business is probably a bit ahead of the rest of the community, and having managed this so well for so long, and seeing the impacts within their own businesses, as opposed to what the fear factor might be in the community or the concern factor.
I'm interested. One more thing. Sorry, Chewy. I know I've had two questions in a row. You can jump in next, mate. But I'm interested in a couple of things, Alan. You say the messaging should be changed. I guess I'd like to know from you to what. And as a citizen who uses businesses, respectfully to business owners, I don't want to take advice from business owners on how to manage an Omicron surge. I want to take advice from epidemiologists and public health sector experts, because I'm not saying this is all businesses. I mean, I am a business owner, but we all know that if you're short of your monthly quota, your monthly income, you need to earn more money. Like a lot of them will have to do because of these restrictions. Many, not all, I'll even say some, I'd even say many, will push boundaries on those if we left it up to the businesses to self-monitor themselves. I mean, I'd rather take advice from an expert in virology than from my local dairy owner on what they're going to do if there was another surge. And the messaging, I'd happily have you contribute to those 2 points.
Sure, I'll deal with this the management of it first. So I'm not suggesting that business would make up their own rules. What you do is you work within the restrictions that you're given, and then apply them to your own business. Now, that's kind of where we've got to now, and that's because Omicron's forced it on you. So it's saying these are the sets of rules, work within them, rather than what we've seen in the past is only these businesses in this sector can open. Whereas many businesses could easily quite comfortably have opened under the very strict restrictions we saw at the old level 3 and 4 and those sorts of things, or at red. They just haven't been allowed to, because the government has sort of managed this and managed it well. Don't get me wrong, but they could have there could have been a pathway that said, again, these are the rules, meet them and you can open. But what we've seen is picking, for want of a better term, winners and losers.
Yeah.
For example, in the construction sector, I'll just give you an example. So some parts of the construction sector could work, like timber framers, all that sort of thing. But to actually complete a house, you need windows and doors. But windows and door manufacturers were deemed non-essential for completing houses and building projects. So how does that work? And they could have opened under the same restrictions as the others.
Chewy?
I just want to acknowledge there that usually I massively roll my eyes when I hear someone from the business community, or say specifically lately the hospitality sector, going on that they want a loosening of restrictions. I just want to say your points make complete sense to me. And I think we are at a point where we do have such a high percentage of vaccinated people. The people that are very anti-vax, anti-mandated, we know that that's a tiny proportion of people. And I mean, I was even commenting to one of my colleagues the other day that some of the restrictions that are still around seem kind of laughable. I saw a sign on a business locally that had, the number restriction for how many people were allowed on their site. And it was something like 140 people in a Kathmandu or a Macpac type shop. And I don't think I've ever seen 138 people in there. Whereas another retailer across the road with a much higher square footage had one that said 75. It didn't make a lot of sense. So I think hopefully what we're going to see on Wednesday is almost a clearinghouse of what do we need, what doesn't work, what isn't appropriate. But yeah, your example from the building sector, I hadn't come across that, and that does seem ridiculous.
We are seeing those examples everywhere, though, aren't we? I mean, people are talking about having to wear a mask walking into a restaurant, and then when you sit down to eat, you take the mask off. It's still sort of, if you're infectious, you're still sort of infectious. I'm interested. This is what I think is going to happen. Then you jump back in, Alan. Is what will happen is the Prime Minister will announce on Wednesday the mandates are coming off in about a month. And then what that will basically mean is they'll be through the surge anyway, that like the Omicron wave will hopefully be tailing off. And then that will be the end of it. Alan, is it going to make any difference to businesses having the mandates come off? Will businesses see significant increase? Will those that are struggling miraculously not be struggling?
It'll be a slow rebuild, I think, is the answer to that, Pat. I think the restrictions will probably come off by mid-April, and that will coincide with the opening of the borders.
That's about 3
I think,
weeks.
yeah,
Yeah.
probably time for Easter.
Yeah. All right.
I think if the red light system or the red light doesn't change to orange or green, I think what you'll see is that they'll lift the number of people allowed to congregate in one place. It might go to 150, it might go to 2, something like that, which would basically catch all the major restaurants and bars right around the country. Some of them will have much larger capacity, but that would, for that particular sector, just an easing there would be quite helpful. I think the mandates coming off just make a difference in some sectors where we know they're struggling. For example, we've got early childhood education providers who are having to stand down large numbers of staff simply because they won't have a booster yet. And some of them have actually had COVID, and then they've been told by their doctor they have to wait 90 days to get their booster. But in the meantime, the time frame for getting fully vaccinated to work in the sector has expired, and they're following medical advice, but it shuts them out of their situation at work. So that will help ease some of the pressures that I know are in the education sector, for example, and you've seen the police and the other case go through as well. So it won't be a flood. It's going to be quite hard work, I think, for many sectors to rebuild what they've lost over the last couple of years. And it's not just the tourism and hospo sectors that are really struggling. There are a number of others as well. So it'll be a long, slow rebuild. And that's why we want to see the language, to the earlier point, we want to see the language change to say, hey, look, if you're taking the precautions and you're vaccinated, then it's time to return to life as normal as we can make it under the circumstances that we're still going to be working under. And don't forget, there's always the prospect of yet another wave of a different variant coming through as well.
Yeah, I just want one quick point, because I want clarification, because you just talked about early childhood sectors and people being stood down because they didn't have boosters. That wasn't the mandate. The mandate was if you're not fully vaccinated, which is two. That was December of last year. Nothing. I googled it as you were talking, because I was like, have I missed something? No,
there was some delays between people getting their first and second shots. Sorry, not the boosters. I was just mixing that up.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that was we were clear on that. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Hey, Alan, thank you for joining us. You're from the Employers and Manufacturers Association, head of advocacy and strategy. Really appreciate your time. And appreciate getting your input on that. And we'll have you back. It was good. It was a good chat.
Okay.
We appreciate that, mate.
All right. All right.
Thanks, Alan.